Hello and welcome to our lecture of the 16th century poetry presented by Dr. Ala Al-Halbusi, a lecturer at the Department of English, the College of Art of Alirqia University. This lecture is presented to you as part of the Google Classroom activities. Therefore, if you would like to raise any question, please comment on the video on our classroom and I'll try to answer all the questions as soon as possible. Without further ado, let's get started. This is the second lecture where we present the second poem by William Shakespeare, which is Sonnet 18. I'm going to read the poem and analyze it line by line and then end up with the literary devices of the poem, and I hope you are going to enjoy it and learn a lot from it. So let's start by reading the poem itself. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day, thou art more lovely and more temperate? Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometimes too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometimes declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines till time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. As I have explained earlier, that Shakespeare's sonnets are divided into 4 parts, 3 quatrains and couplet. So the 3 quatrains consist of 12 lines plus the couplets, which consist of 2 lines. So this is the first quatrain, where Shakespeare says in it, "Shall I compare thee to a summer day, thou art more lovely and more temperate? Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lace hath all too short a date." In the first line, Shakespeare was wondering and giving a question: shall I compare thee to a summer day? Shall I compare you to a summer day? So in order to put you in the image and make you understand why would Shakespeare compare his beloved or a friend or whoever he's addressing in this poem to a summer day? Well, if we understand the climate in England, where the weather is rainy, humid most of the days of the year, summer is so precious to them. Therefore, summer and spring are the most beautiful time of the year. That's why Shakespeare is trying to compare his beloved to a summer day. He said, "Shall I compare thee to a summer day?" And now he's giving, well, in the second line, he said, "Thou art more lovely and more temperate. However, you are more lovely and more moderate, متوازن, معتدل, أكثر من الصيف. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May." So he is giving now negative aspects of summer to highlight the beauty of his beloved, where he says, "Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease had all too short a date." Summer is short, it just shake the darling buds of May, which means that it has its own flaws that Shakespeare cannot find in his beloved. That's the first quatrain. Let's move to the second quatrain now. In the second quatrain, Shakespeare says, "Sometimes too hot." Well, he's continuing in describing summer. He says, "Sometimes too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometime declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed." Sometimes too hot the eye of heaven shines, which The eye of heaven means the sun. So the sun sometimes is too hot in summer, and often is his gold complexion dimmed. And sometimes it's dimmed and go away very quick and go dark. The weather go dark very quickly. And every fair from fair sometimes declines. And that's every beauty, everything beautiful will decline, will end by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. So it's either by chance, by accident, or by nature. It's the nature of everything that it will fade and go away. And so nothing is going to stay as beautiful as it is forever. This indicates that summer is not adequate. Summer is not fair enough to compare his beloved to. And then let's say the third quatrain and what is going to happen in the sequence of description of the poem. Now we are here at the third quatrain and the couplet of the sonnet, where Shakespeare says, "But thy eternal summer shall not fade." So despite the beauty of summer, it has its flaws, it has its negative aspects, which you do not have. But thy eternal summer shall not fade. Your beauty, your summer is not going to fade. No loose possession of that fair thou owest, nor that fairness and beauty that you have will never fade and will last forever. Nor shall death brag thou wondrous in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. Nor even death will be able to remove that beauty, will not be able to decline that beauty, despite its power over everything. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So as long as men can breathe and eyes can see and life can move on, you are going to live in this. And by this, Shakespeare means the sonnet, his poetry. You are going to live in my poetry, and my poetry is going to give you the life that you need. Therefore, Shakespeare was right by saying that you are going to live forever in my poetry, because after about 400 years now since this poem or this sonnet was written, we are still reading it. We are still teaching it. We are still discussing it and study it, and discuss and analyze the beauty of these lines, and how Shakespeare was so brilliant in expressing his emotions through the lines and words of his poem. This part of the lecture, we are going to discuss the poetic devices, which is as a usual step that we end every lecture that we analyze a poem or a sonnet, and to see how these devices work and how the poet used them in order to give music, live images to his lines and words. So let's start with the first poetic device. So let's start with the rhyme scheme. As usual, as we have seen in the previous lecture, since the poem is divided into 3 quatrains and a couplet, so we will divide the rhyme scheme accordingly. So as we can see in the first line, the last word, which is day, is rhymed with may in the third line. So A for the first line and A for the third line. The second line ends with temperate, date, temperate, date. So temperate in the second line rhymes with the fourth line, which is date. In the second quatrain, we can see shines, which rhymes with declines in the third line. And again, the second line, which is dimmed, rhymes with untrimmed in the fourth line. So the second quatrain will be C, D, C, D. The first line of the third quatrain ends with fade, which rhymes with shade. And then the second line ends with oast, which rhymes with grossed in the fourth line. So that will be E, F, E, F. And finally, the last two lines, which is the part of the couplet, ends with C and the, with both rhymes. So that will be G, G. So the poem, all in all, will be A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. And that's the rhyme scheme. The other device that we can see here is metaphor, where the poet starts with, shall I compare thee to a summer day? Shall I make a comparison between you and a summer's day? That's the metaphor we can see here. We can see rough winds in the third lines do shake the darling buds of May, as if the rough winds has the power of or the quality of a human being, where it can shake the darling buds of May. And then he says, summer's lease all too short to date, which means that summer has a lease or a duration like that of a lease on an apartment. That is too short. He also says that heaven, or the sun, shines too hot, or sometimes disappear. When the sun disappears, the sun's complexion is dimmed, as if he were a person. Later, the poet personifies death, who stalks people in his shade. However, his beloved's eternal summer, a metaphor for her beauty, will not disappear, as she will live forever in the poem. Also, with repetition, assonance, alliteration, and eternal end rhyme, the reader is certainly treated to a range of device that creates texture, music, and interest. Note the language of these lines: rough, shake, too short, sometimes too hot, often, dimmed, declines, chance, changing, untrimmed. Assonance and repetition, there are interesting combination within each line which add to the texture and soundscape. Rough, buds, shake, May, hot, heaven, eye, shines, often, gold, complexion, fair from fair, sometimes, declines, chance, changing. There are contrasts between the eternity and ending in line 7 and line 9. Also, when he said declined versus grows, shines versus dimmed. And finally, the lover's beauty, metaphorically, and eternal summer will be preserved forever in the poet's immortal lines. There is repetition in the last line when the poet says this and this. Perhaps only someone of genius could claim to have such literary powers, strong enough to preserve the beauty of a lover beyond even death. And this power, this genius, is no one less than William Shakespeare himself. Well, this is the end of our lecture, and as usual, please check all the resources on this slide for further information about the topic, and inshallah I will see you next lecture. Have a lovely time.